He checked his Brioni tuxedo in the mirror, a smug smile playing on his lips. Tonight, he would ascend. Tonight, at the legendary Vance Foundation Gala, he would finally shed his boring, simple wife and introduce the woman who deserved to be on his arm. He gave his wife Jane a dismissive glance. "Don't wait up, darling. This is out of your league." He left her in their penthouse, a ghost in his grand life. He had no idea that the woman he'd just left behind, the woman he saw as nothing, wasn't just invited to the ball. She was the one who owned it. Damien Stone was a man who believed he was sculpted from marble, while all others were mere clay. He was in his own mind a self-made titan of New York finance. At 34, he was a senior vice president at Blackwood Capital, a position he'd clawed his way to with what he called unrelenting genius. In reality, his career was a series of uncanny lucky breaks. Deals that should have collapsed suddenly firmed up. Hostile clients mysteriously softened. He attributed all of it to his own magnetic charisma. His greatest acquisition, as he sometimes thought of her, was his wife, Jane. They had met at Harvard. He was the ambitious MBA student, and she was the quiet, introspective art history undergrad. He saw her as beautiful in a simple way, but more importantly, she was pliable. She was unassuming, asked for little, and seemed perpetually impressed by his bluster. She was the perfect decorative background for a man destined for the foreground. Their marriage, now 6 years old, was a study in polite neglect. He lived in a world of high-stakes trades, $1,000 dinners at per se, and whispered networking. She lived in his world, but only as a resident. She managed their stunning Upper East Side penthouse, a sterile expanse of glass and white marble, but she never truly inhabited it. She was just there. Tonight was the night Damien's entire life was set to detonate in a good way. It was the night of the Vance Foundation Gala. This was not just a party. It was the party. Hosted by the enigmatic and terrifyingly powerful Arthur Vance, the chairman of Vance Holdings, this gala was the beating heart of American power. To be invited was to be anointed. And Damien hadn't just been invited. He'd secured a +1. He stood before the full-length mirror, adjusting the silk lapels of his custom Brioni tuxedo. "Jane," he called out, not turning. Jane emerged from the library, a book in her hand. She was wearing simple linen trousers and a cashmere sweater. Her brown hair was tied back and she wore no makeup. She looked as she always did, like a librarian who had accidentally wandered into a palace. "You look very handsome, Damien," she said, her voice soft. "Of course," he said, fixing his onyx cufflinks. "Tonight is critical. Arthur Vance himself will be there. They say he's announcing his successor. Getting FaceTime with him tonight could mean, well, you wouldn't understand. It's the big league." He finally turned to her, his gaze sweeping over her with a familiar mix of impatience and disdain. "I'll be late. Don't wait up." "I won't," she said, her eyes unreadable. "Have a good time." He paused, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "You know, Jane, you could try," he said, gesturing vaguely. "Try to, I don't know, be more. This city eats the simple." "I'm happy as I am, Damien," he scoffed. "That's the problem." He pulled a black anodized aluminum credit card from his wallet, the kind with no limit and a heavy annual fee. He tossed it onto the marble hall table. "Go buy yourself, I don't know, a new set of those boring plates you like. Get your hair done. Something." It was a dismissal, a final pat on the head to the pet he was about to abandon. "Thank you, Damien," she said, not moving to take the card. He smiled that blindingly confident smile that had 6 years ago charmed her. Now it looked like a predator's baring of teeth. Right. Well, I'm off. Don't want to keep the car waiting. He didn't kiss her. He didn't look back. The heavy penthouse door clicked shut, the silence of the apartment settling in its wake. Jane stood motionless for a full minute, listening to the faint whir of the private elevator descending. When it was gone, she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let it out. Damien Stone wasn't just going to the Vance Gala. He was going with Isabella Rossi. Isabella was everything Jane was not. She was a public relations executive, loud, vibrant, and aggressively ambitious. Her Instagram was a curated gallery of her perfect body, her networking conquests, and the kind of sharp, angular fashion that screamed, "Look at me." Damien had been having an affair with her for 8 months. He was, in a word, predictable. Jane had known about the affair since its 2nd week. She had known when Damien's late nights at the office began, when his phone was suddenly angled away from her on the sofa, when the scent of fracas. A perfume Jane found nauseatingly sweet clung to his shirts. Damien was, for all his genius, a terrible liar. He was halfway across town, speeding toward Isabella's downtown loft in his chartered Rolls-Royce Ghost. He felt a profound sense of liberation. Tonight he would introduce Isabella not as his mistress, but as his partner. He would make the soft launch. The whispers would start, and by Monday his lawyers would file for divorce. He would claim Jane couldn't keep up with his life. His circle would understand. They would applaud. He arrived at Isabella's building. She swept into the car, a vision in crimson backless couture. "Well," she purred, kissing him. "Do I look the part?" "You look like you own the world, baby," Damien said, pouring them both champagne from the car's mini-fridge. "Not yet," Isabella said, her eyes gleaming. "But after tonight, when you get in with Arthur Vance, we will. Just imagine it, Damien. You, me, and a seat on the board of whatever company you want. You're a king. You just needed a queen, not a mouse." "To us," Damien said, clinking his glass against hers. "To the new power couple of New York." He was intoxicated with his own brilliance. He, Damien Stone, had orchestrated this. He had secured the invitation. He was bringing the perfect woman. He was about to meet the most powerful man in the country. He had shed his boring, simple wife. He was a master of the universe. He was in his own mind infallible. And the infallible, as history has so often shown, are the easiest to break. The moment the thud of the penthouse door echoed through the marble hall, Jane's posture changed. The simple wife, the librarian, the ghost vanished. The woman who stood in the hall was someone else entirely. Her shoulders straightened, her chin lifted. A cold, clear focus snapped into her eyes. She walked past the credit card Damien had thrown, not even glancing at it. She entered her private study, a room Damien never entered, finding it cluttered with old books. She sat at her 18th century French desk and picked up a secure, unlisted phone. She dialed a single number. "Marcus," she said. "Miss Jane," a gravelly professional voice replied. "He's mobile. He's on his way to the pickup, Isabella Rossi. They'll proceed to the gala from there. Estimated arrival at Greythorne is 8:15. We'll be tracking. The car is 5 minutes out. Are you ready?" "I am," Jane said, and hung up. She moved from the study to her dressing room. Damien believed her closet was a modest affair of beige cashmere and sensible flats. He had never opened the biometric locked door at the far end. The room beyond was not a closet. It was a vault. Awaiting her was not a dress, but a statement. It was a bespoke creation from a legendary reclusive Parisian designer, a man who only worked for 3 families in the world. It was a gown of the deepest sapphire velvet, a color that evoked midnight skies and royal blood. It was structured architectural and utterly severe, designed to command respect, not to beg for attention. And with it, the jewels. She opened a safe. Inside, on black velvet, lay the Vance emeralds. This was not some Cartier bauble. This was a set with a name, a history. A necklace of 6 colossal, perfectly matched Colombian emeralds, each one surrounded by flawless diamonds with earrings and a bracelet to match. The set was rumored to have been a gift from a Russian Tsar to a Vance ancestor, and was considered priceless not just in monetary terms, but as a symbol of the family's legacy. As Jane began to prepare, her mind drifted back, not in sorrow, but in analysis. She had loved Damien once. The man she met at Harvard was charming, driven, and full of life. She had been hiding then too, living under an assumed simple name, desperate for a normal life after a childhood spent in the gilded cage of Vance security. She had wanted to be loved for Jane, not for Vance, and Damien had loved her. But his love was thin, and his ambition was a cancer. It grew, and as it grew, it devoured the man she knew, replacing him with the arrogant, cruel stranger who had just left. Her father, Arthur Vance, had seen it from day one. "He doesn't see you, Jane." Arthur had told her over dinner at their private estate, Greythorne, a year into the marriage. "He sees a comfortable life. He sees a placid woman who will never challenge him. He's a weak man, trying to build a cage for himself out of what he thinks is strength. He'll grow farther," she had insisted. "He just needs to feel secure." A man who needs to diminish his wife to feel secure is not a man, Jane. He is a parasite. The words had stung then. Now they were a cold, hard truth. The affair with Isabella was the final proof. It wasn't even a passionate, tragic affair. It was a networking affair. He was trading up like a man swapping a perfectly good car for a flashier model he thought would impress his friends. Jane's love had died, and in its place a cold, methodical duty had awakened. Damien Stone wasn't just her husband. He was a mistake, and the Vances did not tolerate mistakes. She had been the one to secure his invitation. She had been the one to allow his +1 flagging Isabella's name for security so she would be permitted to enter. She hadn't just known about his plan. She had approved its logistics. Tonight was not a confrontation. It was a corporate restructuring. Damien Stone was a bad asset, and he was about to be liquidated. A discreet chime sounded at her service entrance. Marcus. She was ready. When Jane walked out of the penthouse, she was no longer Jane Stone. She was Jane Vance. Her hair was swept up in an intricate, regal chignon. The Vance emeralds glittered at her throat. The sapphire gown made her look like a warrior queen. The car waiting was not a flashy Rolls. It was a black, armored Mercedes-Maybach S680, a silent, menacing shadow. Marcus, her head of security, a man who had served in the SAS before heading her private detail, held the door. "Greythorne, Ms. Vance?" he asked. "Greythorne." She confirmed, her voice a full octave lower, richer and more confident than the one Damien had heard. "And Marcus' status on my father. The chairman is on site and awaiting your arrival. He's eager." "Good," Jane said, as the car slipped into the New York traffic, a ghost of immense power moving silently through the city. So am I. Greythorn Manor was not in the Hamptons. The Hamptons to the Vances were for new money and summer people. Greythorn was a colossal 100-room granite estate built into the cliffs overlooking the Hudson River, an hour north of the city. It was old money generational power, a fortress that had hosted presidents, kings, and industrial titans for over a century. To reach it, guests had to pass through 3 separate high-security checkpoints. Damien and Isabella arrived at the first gate. The guard, armed and polite, checked their names. Stone Damien, +1, Rossi Isabella. Welcome. He didn't even call me Mr. Stone, Damien muttered, annoyed. Don't worry, darling, Isabella cooed, reapplying her lipstick. By the end of the night, they'll be calling you Sir. They drove for another mile through dense, ancient forest before reaching the second checkpoint, this one manned by men in dark suits with earpieces. Invitation, please, the agent said. Damien presented the heavy, cream-colored card. The agent scanned it. Thank you. Proceed to the lower terrace for cocktails. The main house is restricted. Restricted? Damien bristled. I'm a personal guest. All guests begin on the lower terrace, sir. Enjoy your evening. The long drive up to the manor was breathtaking, but Damien was stewing. Lower terrace. It's probably just a staging area. They finally pulled up to the house. It was less a house than a mountain of architecture lit with the warm golden light of 1,000 windows. Valets, all wearing the Vance family crest, took the car. They were ushered by polite staff onto the lower terrace, a sprawling flagstone patio that could have hosted a football game. A full orchestra played. Champagne flowed like water. Hundreds of people mingled a glittering sea of the rich and ambitious. Damien immediately began to network a shark in familiar waters. He saw the CEO of a rival tech firm, a few junior senators, and a gaggle of journalists who were being kept firmly behind a velvet rope. This is it, Isabella, he whispered, grabbing 2 glasses of Krug champagne. Everyone who matters is here. Where is he? Where's Vance? Isabella asked, her eyes scanning the crowd. He won't be out here, Damien said, spotting a face he knew. He'll be holding court inside. I just need to find a way in. Charles. Perfect. Charles Knight, a managing director from rival firm Carlyle Group, was standing by the fountain. He was everything Damien hated. Old money, effortlessly confident and openly disdainful of climbers like Damien. Stone. Charles said, his voice dripping with condescension. I'm astonished to see you here. I didn't think they let the children swim in the deep end. Damien forced a smile. Charles, always a pleasure. We all have to grow up sometime. Charles's gaze flickered to Isabella, raking over her crimson dress with a look of profound boredom. And you are... Damien felt a surge of defiance. This was it. This was the moment. He pulled Isabella to his side, his hand landing possessively on her bare back. This, Damien announced, his voice just loud enough to carry, is Isabella Rossi, my partner. The word partner landed like a stone in a silent pond. Charles Knight's eyebrows shot up. A few people nearby who knew Damien was married turned to stare. The whispers began instantly. Did he say, partner? Isn't he married to that quiet girl, Jane? My God, he brought his mistress. To this? Isabella, oblivious or perhaps enjoying the notoriety, beamed. She had arrived. Damien felt a rush of adrenaline. He'd done it. He'd made his move. The old life was over. Good to see you, Charles, he said, and steered Isabella away, leaving Charles standing there with a look of stunned, almost comical disbelief. "Well, that's done," Damien said, feeling invincible. "People will talk. Let them. By morning will be the only thing they are talking about." "Oh, Damien, you're so brave," Isabella said, kissing his cheek. They were so wrapped up in their own small, sordid triumph that they didn't notice the atmosphere on the terrace change. The orchestra faded. A hush fell over the crowd. On the grand balcony above them, overlooking the terrace, a set of double doors opened. A single man stepped out. He was tall, in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. He wore a simple, perfect tuxedo, and on his wrist, Damien could just make out the glint of a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime, a watch worth more than Damien's apartment. It was Arthur Vance. He radiated an aura of absolute, indisputable power. The air around him seemed to crackle. Damien was mesmerized. "That's him," he breathed. "That's the king." Arthur Vance stepped to a microphone, and his voice boomed over the terrace, warm but with an edge of steel. "Welcome. Welcome to Greythorn. We are so glad you could join us tonight to support the work of the Vance Foundation." Damien was already plotting. "I have to get to him. If I can just get 5 minutes." "This evening," Arthur continued, "is special. We are not just celebrating a year of philanthropic success. We are celebrating the future." A ripple of excitement went through the crowd. This was it. The succession announcement. "As many of you know," Arthur said, "I have run Vance Holdings for 40 years. It is time to look to the next generation. It is time to formally welcome the true heir to the Vance legacy." Damien's heart was pounding. Who was it? A nephew. A hidden protégé. He or she is about to become the most powerful person in New York, Isabella whispered, her eyes wide. Damien scoffed. "Besides me, you mean?" Arthur Vance smiled a rare, genuine smile that lit up his face. "This heir is of course no stranger to me, but she has valued her privacy. Tonight that changes. Tonight I ask you to welcome my daughter as she prepares to take her seat on the board of Vance Holdings." The crowd exploded in murmurs. His daughter Vance had a daughter. She was a myth, a ghost. No one had photographed her in at least a decade. "A trust fund baby," Damien whispered to Isabella dismissively. "Probably some fragile recluse." "Good. An easy target." Arthur Vance turned back to the open doors of the balcony. "Please join me in welcoming my pride, my joy, and the future of our family, Jane Vance." And from the shadows of the house, a woman stepped into the light. For a single agonizing second, Damien Stone's brain refused to process the image before him. It was like looking at a split screen. On one side was his wife Jane, plain simple, in beige cashmere, a ghost in her own home. On the other was the woman on the balcony, a queen draped in emeralds that glittered like poison, wearing a sapphire gown that seemed to drink the light. Her posture was iron, her gaze was glacial. And they were the same person. The glass of Krug slipped from Damien's fingers. It shattered on the flagstone, the sound impossibly loud in the stunned silence. "Damien," Isabella whispered, her hand tightening on his arm. Her voice was sharp, confused. "Damien, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." He couldn't speak. His blood had turned to ice water. He was vaguely aware of Charles Knight a few feet away, watching him, a slow, horrified, and then utterly delighted smile dawning on his face. On the balcony, Jane Vance stood beside her father. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked with terrifying precision directly at him. Across the expanse of the terrace, through hundreds of people, her eyes found his. And she smiled. It was not a smile of warmth. It was the smile of a hunter that has just watched its prey walk calmly into a steel-jawed trap. Who is that?" Isabella demanded, her voice rising. "She looks familiar." "Damien, who is that?" Damien's mouth was dry. He managed a single, choked word. "Jane." Isabella's perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth. "What, that's not Jane. Your Jane is, she's at home." "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur Vance's voice boomed, "my daughter, Jane." Polite then thunderous applause erupted. Jane descended the grand stone steps from the balcony to the lower terrace, her father at her side. The crowd parted for her, as if she were royalty. A senator Damien had been trying to meet for 6 months, practically bowed, taking her hand. "Jane, my dear, you look radiant. Absolutely radiant." "Senator," she replied, her voice the one he knew, but now infused with a resonant power he had never heard. "So good of you to come." The CEO of the tech firm he'd seen earlier, a man known for his brutal arrogance, inclined his head. "Miss Vance? A pleasure." "Mr. Chen," she said with a nod. "I trust your new semiconductor plant is progressing." "We should discuss it." This wasn't a debut. It was a resumption. She wasn't being introduced to these people. She was greeting them. They all knew her. Damien's world was not just tilting. It was in a full, catastrophic terminal spin. Every lucky break, every genius trade, every impossible door that had miraculously opened for him. It wasn't him. It was her. She had been pulling the strings of his entire life, and he had been dancing a deluded marionette. His promotion, his bonuses, the apartment, the invitation to this very party. It was all her, and he had just very publicly introduced his mistress. "Oh my God," Isabella whispered, her face the color of ash. She was finally truly understanding. "Oh no. No, no, no. Damien, you idiot. You idiot. You told me she was a nobody." I thought she was," he stammered, his mind a blank white noise of panic. "You didn't know your own wife was Jane Vance, the daughter of Arthur God Almighty Vance." Isabella was backing away from him now as if he were diseased. "I have to go. I wasn't here. You and I, we're nothing. I never met you." "Isabella, wait!" Damien hissed, grabbing her arm. "Get off me!" she shrieked, pulling away. And just like that, Jane was in front of them. She had glided through the crowd, her father and 2 grim-looking security men, one of whom Damien now recognized as Marcus, their doorman, flanking her. The small localized drama had drawn a circle of silence around them. Everyone was watching. Jane looked at Damien. Her face was a mask of cold, polite inquiry. The Vance emeralds at her throat seemed to pulse. "Damien," she said, her voice terrifyingly calm, "I see you made it." He opened his mouth. No sound came out. He was paralyzed. His arrogance, his confidence, his entire sense of self had been amputated in a single, clean stroke. "And you must be Isabella," Jane continued, turning her gaze to the trembling woman. Isabella looked like she was about to be sick. "The partner. It's a bold dress. Thank you for coming." The politeness was more brutal than any scream. Damien finally found his voice, a desperate, pathetic croak. "Jane. Darling, this is a misunderstanding. A joke. This is a joke, right?" Jane looked at him, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine emotion crossed her face. Pity. It was the most devastating expression he had ever seen. "A joke," she repeated. "No, Damien. The joke is over. Jane. Darling, please." Damien was practically whimpering. He reached out to touch her arm, a desperate, fumbling gesture. Marcus, the head of security, stepped forward half an inch. He didn't touch Damien. He didn't have to. His mere presence was a wall of physical threat. Damien's hand froze in mid-air. "Don't call me darling," Jane said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more chilling than a shout. "You lost that privilege about 8 months ago. To be precise, you lost it on the Tuesday. You had a client dinner at the Carlisle, but were in fact at Isabella's loft. You prefer fracas. A poor choice. It's dreadfully cloying." Damien's blood evaporated. She knew. She had known everything. Arthur Vance, who had been watching this exchange with the detached interest of a biologist studying an insect, finally spoke. His voice was a low rumble, like distant artillery. "So this," he said, "is Damien Stone." He said the name as if it were something distasteful he'd found on his shoe. Damien's head snapped up, his panic momentarily replaced by his ingrained obsequious nature. "Mr. Vance, Sir Arthur, why, I am so honored to meet you. I'm your son-in-law." Arthur Vance let out a short, sharp bark of laughter. The crowd around them winced. "You are not my son-in-law," Arthur growled. "You are a line item, a rounding error." A project my daughter took on, believing she could turn a sow's ear into, well, anything other than a sow's ear. She was mistaken. The public humiliation was so profound, so absolute, that Damien felt his knees buckle. "Sir, please, let's talk about your genius career at Blackwood Capital," Arthur continued, stepping closer. The man smelled of old money, expensive cigars, and absolute power. "Do you know Jim Blackwood, the Blackwood in Blackwood Capital?" Of course I know of him." "He was my roommate at Yale," Arthur said, flicking a piece of lint from his lapel. "When my daughter asked me to help her new husband, I called Jim. I told him to hire you. You weren't the best candidate. You were, in his words, an arrogant lightweight with a decent resume. But I asked, as a favor." Every head in the vicinity was turned toward them. This was not just a scene. It was a public execution. "But my trades," Damien whispered, his last defense crumbling. "My portfolio. I'm up 30% year over year." "Your trades," Jane said, taking over. Her voice was sharp, a surgeon's scalpel. "Damien, you are the single worst trader I have ever seen. You are reckless, you follow trends, and you have the strategic foresight of a lemming." She motioned to a man standing behind her father, a thin man with a tablet. "This is Mr. Lee, our family's chief portfolio manager. Perhaps you'd like to explain, Mr. Lee." Mr. Lee stepped forward, his face devoid of emotion. "Mr. Stone, for 6 years, Vance Holdings has been monitoring your trade activity. On 47 separate occasions, your positions were on the verge of catastrophic failure. On 47 occasions, we took opposing positions, absorbing your losses and artificially inflating your successes to maintain your image. Jane finished the thought. That miraculous short squeeze you bragged about last Christmas, the one that made your year. That was us, Damien. We spent $200 million in 3 hours to save you from being fired and likely investigated by the SEC. Damien was no longer just pale. He was a greenish white. He was going to be sick. He had nothing. He was a hollow man. His entire life, his career, his sense of self, it was all a lie. A construct built and maintained by the woman he had dismissed as a simpleton. You were a charity project, Damien, Jane said, her voice flat. My last failed charity project, and my tolerance for your expenses has run out. She looked past him at Isabella, who was frozen in horror. Ms. Rossi, you attached yourself to the wrong man. You thought he was a king, but he's not even a pawn. He's the gum on the king's boot. Isabella burst into tears, a high-pitched, ugly wail. I didn't know, I swear, I didn't know. He told me he loved me. He told me his wife was a nobody. I am a nobody, Jane agreed, a terrifying calm settling on her face. I am nobody you will ever speak to or of again. You will leave this property. You will leave this city. If I hear your name, if I see your face on social media, if you so much as text a gossip columnist, I will personally ensure that the only public relations you ever manage again is for a regional budget motel chain in Ohio. Am I clear? Isabella nodded frantically, tears and mascara streaming down her face. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. She turned and fled. Pushing through the stunned crowd, her crimson dress a flag of her utter defeat. And then Damien was alone. He stood in a circle of silence, surrounded by the most powerful people in the world, exposed as a fraud, a fool and an adulterer. He looked at Jane, his eyes wild with a final desperate plea. Jane, please, 6 years, our life, it meant something, didn't it? The man you met at Harvard, I'm still him. I can be him. We can fix this. Jane looked at him for a long, cold moment. The man I met at Harvard is dead, she said. You killed him with your greed. As for our life, it meant that my father was right, and I was wrong. That is a mistake I will only make once. She turned to her father. Father, I believe the trash needs to be taken out. Marcus, Arthur Vance said with a simple nod. Sir. Marcus and the other security guard stepped forward. They each took one of Damien's arms in a grip of pure, unyielding steel. No! Damien suddenly shrieked, his composure shattering completely. You can't do this. Get your hands off me. I'm Damien Stone. I'm her husband. You're trespassing, Marcus said, his voice bored. He began to drag the fighting, screaming man toward the service entrance. Jane, you can't. I made you. You'd be nothing without me. You're just a spoiled brat. You'll regret this. I'll sue. I'll tell everyone. His voice faded as he was dragged through the house, his expensive Brioni tuxedo ripping at the shoulder. The heavy oak door slammed shut, and silence, once again, fell on the terrace. The silence that followed Damien's exit was absolute. Hundreds of guests stood frozen champagne flutes, halfway to their lips, eyes wide. They had just witnessed the most brutal, efficient, and public character assassination in New York high society history. Jane Vance stood in the center of the terrace, the emeralds at her throat catching the light. She looked perfectly, terrifyingly serene. Charles Knight, the man from Carlyle Group, was the first to react. He slowly, deliberately began to clap. It was a soft, mocking applause. But then the senator, seeing his cue, joined in. Then the tech CEO. Within seconds, the entire terrace had erupted in thunderous applause. They were not clapping for the drama. They were clapping for the return of the Queen. They were acknowledging the shift in power. The Vances had re-established their dominance. Jane let the applause wash over her for a moment, then raised a single, elegant hand. The crowd fell silent instantly. "My apologies," she said, her voice carrying across the terrace with effortless command. Small housekeeping matter. Now, if you'll please join me in the grand ballroom, I believe the orchestra is ready. And I do hope you'll be generous this evening. The foundation has so much work to do." She smiled, and it was as if the entire sordid affair had never happened. She was Jane Vance, heir to Greythorne, and she was in control. She turned, linked her arm with her father's, and glided into the manor. The crowd, buzzing with the story they would tell for decades, followed like a tide. As she walked, Arthur leaned in. "Well," he murmured, "I'd say that's a seat on the board well earned. Though I am curious, my dear. $200 million to save his short squeeze." A tiny, genuine smile touched Jane's lips. "A slight exaggeration, Father. It was only $120 million. Arthur laughed, a deep, satisfied sound. "That's my girl." The party continued. Millions were raised. Jane was magnetic, moving from titan to titan, discussing global strategy, art, and philanthropy. She was not the girl from Harvard. She was not Damian Stone's simple wife. She was the woman who had been trained since birth to run this world, and she had just officially taken her throne. Meanwhile, Damian Stone's world was being deconstructed piece by piece. He had been dragged not to the front gate, but to a cold, sterile security office in the sub-basement of Greythorne. His wallet, keys, and phone were taken from him. "You can't do this," he repeated, his voice hoarse. "You're holding me against my will. This is kidnapping." "You are a trespasser on private property, Mr. Stone," Marcus said, scrolling through a tablet. "We are simply processing you out." A black car, a simple sedan, pulled up to the rear exit. Damien was forced inside. He was not taken home. He was driven to the city and left unceremoniously on the sidewalk in front of his Jane's apartment building. His tuxedo was torn. He had no keys, no wallet. He tried to speak to the doorman. "Excuse me, it's me, Damian Stone. I need to get upstairs." The doorman, a man who had greeted him by name for 6 years, looked at him with cold, dead eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. I have no one by that name on my residence list. You'll have to leave or I'll call the police." "What, I live here?" he yelled, rattling the locked glass door. "Not anymore, sir." He was forced back onto the street. He was a king without a kingdom, or a wallet, or a phone. He was just a man in a ripped tuxedo on Park Avenue at 1 a.m. He began the long, humiliating walk to his office. He would call his lawyer. He would call his... Well, he had no one to call. When he finally arrived at the Blackwood Capitol building at 3 a.m., having had to beg a taxi driver to take him for free, the night guard wouldn't let him in. "Mr. Stone, your access has been revoked." "What are you talking about? I'm a senior vice president." The guard pointed to a small, sealed banker's box on the security desk. "I was told to give you this. You've been terminated, sir. Effective immediately." Inside the box were a few personal items from his desk, and a single piece of paper, a termination letter. It was signed by Jim Blackwood himself. The reason gross moral turpitude and actions bringing catastrophic disrepute to the firm. He was done. Blacklisted. Finished. The true liquidation, however, was happening back at the penthouse. When Jane returned from the gala at 4 a.m., the apartment was not empty. It was filled with a team of women in white gloves. They were not movers. They were purifiers. Every item Damien Stone had ever purchased, every suit, every shoe, every cufflink, every file, every toothbrush was being oxed and labeled. "What's the status?" Jane asked, sipping a glass of water. "We're almost complete, Ms. Vance," the team leader said. "The items will be incinerated by 6 a.m. "Not incinerated," Jane said. "Donate them, all of them. Send them to the Bowery mission. Someone should get some use out of them." "Very good, Ms. Vance." Jane walked to the sterile white marble hall. The black credit card Damien had tossed at her was still there. She picked it up, looked at it for a moment, and then with a simple snap broke it in half and dropped the pieces into a waste bin. She walked into the master bedroom. By morning, the locks would be changed, her name legally restored to Jane Vance, and the divorce papers which she'd had drawn up 6 months ago would be filed. Damien Stone was not just out of her life. He was being erased. The downfall of Damien Stone was not a quiet affair. It was the talk of Wall Street for a month. To be vanced, it became a new verb, a synonym for being so thoroughly and publicly destroyed that your very existence was called into question. Damien, of course, tried to fight. He hired a shark of a divorce lawyer screaming about marital assets and community property. The meeting was by all accounts brief. Jane's lawyer, a quiet, terrifying man from a firm that had represented the Vance family since the 19th century, slid a single thin folder across the table. "My client, Ms. Vance, is prepared to be generous," he said. Damien's lawyer laughed. "Generous? Your client has illegally frozen all of my client's assets. He's entitled to 50% of that penthouse, 50% of the art." 50% of... Jane's lawyer held up a hand. "You are mistaken. He is entitled to 50% of the marital assets. The penthouse," he said, tapping the folder, "was purchased by a Vance family trust 2 years before the marriage. Mr. Stone was merely a listed resident. The art is all on loan from the Vance Foundation. The cars are leased by Vance Holdings. The very funds in their joint account were deposited monthly from Ms. Vance's personal trust." He slid the folder open. "We have, however, catalogued Mr. Stone's actual contributions to the marital estate." He pulled out a single sheet of paper. "It seems," the lawyer said, "that Mr. Stone purchased a $1,200 television in 2019 and a $2,300 subscription to a Wine of the Month club. Ms. Vance is prepared to offer him a one-time final payment of $1,750, representing 50% of the depreciated value of those assets. In exchange, he will sign this." He produced a second document, an ironclad non-disclosure agreement that forbade Damien from ever speaking the name Vance or Stone in connection with Jane for any reason to any person for the rest of his natural life. "This is an insult," Damien's lawyer blustered. "It is." Jane's lawyer agreed. "But it is the only offer. If he refuses, Ms. Vance will of course cease to be generous, and she will countersue Mr. Stone for the $120 million his trading cost her family fund. We have the receipts." Damien Stone signed. He took the $1,750 and vanished. His reputation on Wall Street was so toxic that no firm would even interview him. He couldn't get a loan. He couldn't get a lease. 6 months after the gala, Charles Knight, the man from Carlyle Group, was walking through the financial district. He stopped at a pret-a-manger to grab a coffee, and he saw him. Damien Stone. His custom Brioni suits were gone, replaced by an ill-fitting, cheap polyester uniform. He was wiping down a table. He looked gaunt, haunted, and 10 years older. Charles just stared, his coffee forgotten. Damien looked up. Their eyes met. Damien saw the flash of recognition, the pity, the disgust. He immediately dropped his cleaning rag, turned, and fled into the employees-only back room, a ghost of a man. Isabella Rossi's fate was no better. True to Jane's word, her name became poison. She was fired from her PR firm. Her social media went dark. She was last seen by a society blogger, boarding a bus at Port Authority, her designer luggage replaced by a simple duffel bag. She was, as promised, going back to Ohio. Jane Vance, however, was just beginning. She had taken her seat on the board of Vance Holdings, but she was no one's trust fund baby. She was, as her father had always known, a shark. She was more ruthless, more brilliant, and more driven than he had ever been. She began a systematic restructuring of the entire company. She cut redundancy. She fired legacy executives who had been coasting on their family names. She pivoted the company's $200 billion portfolio toward emerging tech and renewable energy, outmaneuvering competitors like Blackstone and Carlyle. She was within a year the most powerful and respected new voice in American finance. She was also the most feared. She was Jane Vance, and no one ever again would make the mistake of calling her simple. 2 years after the gala, Jane Vance stood in the main boardroom of Vance Tower, a 90-story monument of steel and glass in Midtown Manhattan. She was now officially co-chair of Vance Holdings Halls. Her father had happily taken a step back, spending his days on his yacht, safe in the knowledge, as he told Forbes, that the barbarian at the gate is now my daughter. The boardroom was silent, filled with the 20 most powerful executives in her empire. A young, brilliant, and slightly terrified vice president, a man named Thomas, had just finished a 90-minute presentation on a proposed hostile takeover of a rival tech firm. He'd done his homework. It was a good plan. But it wasn't a Vance plan. He finished. And so that's our proposal, Ms. Vance. Jane, at the head of the long obsidian table, was perfectly still. She had been listening unblinking for the entire presentation. She wore a severe, dark grey Tom Ford suit. The only hint of her old life was the simple, thin gold band on her right hand, the wedding ring she had worn with Damien. She'd had it melted down and recast into a sharp, pointed signet ring bearing the Vance crest. A reminder. She looked at Thomas. He was ambitious, smart, and reminded her just a little of a young Damien. The good parts. Thomas, she said, her voice quiet but filling the room. You've done excellent work. Your research is flawless. Your projections are logical. Thomas allowed himself a small, relieved smile. Unfortunately, she continued, your proposal is also timid expensive and based on a fundamental misunderstanding of our target. The smile vanished. You are proposing a war of attrition. You want to buy them out. A hostile bid. It will be public, it will be messy, and it will drive their stock price up, costing us 20% more than it's worth. It is a brute's plan. She stood and walked to the smart board, picking up a stylus. We are not brutes. We are surgeons. She brought up the rival company's organizational chart. You've targeted their CEO. A mistake. He's a figurehead. The real power, she said, circling a different name, is here. Their chief technical officer. She built their entire platform. and she is, according to our intel, deeply unhappy with her compensation." She looked at Thomas. "You propose we buy the company. I propose we buy the CTO. We acquire her team, and her patents, which are conveniently set to expire from her non-compete in 3 months. We let her build our own superior version of their platform, and we launch it 1 week before their Q4 earnings call." She leaned forward. "We don't buy their company, Thomas. We eviscerate it. We make it obsolete. We take their talent, we take their market share, and we leave them with nothing but a dying brand and a mountain of overhead. That is the Vance way." The boardroom was silent, the executives staring at her in awe. Jane smiled, that same cold, precise smile from the gala. "Your research was good, though. Apply it to this new strategy. I want a full plan on my desk by Monday." "Yes. Yes, Miss Vance." "Thank you, Miss Vance." Thomas stammered, gathering his things. She watched them all file out, a room full of powerful men, all of them looking at her with a mixture of terror and profound respect. She was alone. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city she now in many ways commanded. She was not the simple wife. She was not the trust fund baby. She was Jane Vance. She had been forged in the lie of her marriage and had emerged as pure hard steel. She had paid for her one mistake, her one moment of weakness, 6 years ago at Harvard, and she would never, ever make it again. The cage was broken, and the queen was at last free. In a world built on power, Damian Stone made the fatal mistake of not knowing who held it. He saw his wife as a simple, quiet accessory, while she was, in fact, the architect of his entire reality. He thought he was climbing to the top, only to find out she was the top, and she was tired of holding him up. His fall was swift, total, and a brutal lesson. The person you underestimate the most is often the one holding all the cards. What did you think of Jane's ultimate cold-blooded revenge? Was it pure justice or a chilling display of power? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories where the tables are turned and the truth comes out in the most dramatic way possible, make sure to like this video and share it with a friend who loves a good twist. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story of real-life drama and shocking revelations.